Hello everyone, how are you? People are gradually realizing, my generation in particular and the succeeding ones, are slowly realizing that capitalism is not all that it promised to be. Now, a disclaimer before we proceed: I'm not a political scientist or a historian. I'm a physician, but I think regardless of one's field or one's profession, it's our civic duty as a citizen, both a local and a global citizen, to be abreast with what's going on in the world. And if you've seen even just social media, you will notice that the world has not been particularly peaceful lately. In the country where I live in, the Philippines, for the past 2 months now and counting, people have really been upset. They've been angry. And that's an understatement. Because there has been recent allegations with hard evidence that the government's favored contractors for supposed projects which will help out our country's flood problem, because our country has always had a problem with flooding, especially during the rainy season. So the government has awarded these contracts to their favored contractors, of course, friends, political allies, and so on. And news has got out that many, mind you, not the minority, but many, the majority of these favored contractors actually had ghost projects. They didn't do anything with the money they were awarded. What happened to the money was they simply took it for their own personal enrichment. In Filipino, binulsa lang, literally. The money went to their own pockets. And unsurprisingly, spoiler warning, there were no flood control projects. And the timing couldn't be more apt, because when all of these allegations, all of these revelations were going on, our country suffered at least two heavy downpours in the past few weeks, and people really did experience the brunt of flooding, especially those living in our congested cities. People literally died, and they do die because of poor flood controlling in our country. And the recent news in our country really highlighted the fact that the greed of the elite, of these few, does indeed not just suppress, not just exploit, but the greed literally kills the proletariat, the poor and vulnerable working class, and the poor, literally. In the past 2 weeks, we've also seen that Nepal and Indonesia have had their own share of strikes, protests, also against corruption, against unabated greed. And these happenings prompted me to read Karl Marx's seminal work on political economy, which is Capital, Das Kapital in German. I'm not a communist, I'm not a Marxist, but I think one should always be open and enrich one's mind with as varied a view as possible, as multifaceted a range of literature as possible, so that we don't get stuck looking at the world from just a single lens, and that's what I've always done for myself. And the recent news really strikes a chord when one rereads Karl Marx's seminal work. Karl Marx is, of course, famous for being the so-called father of Marxism, eventually communism. But one does not need to be a communist to realize that capitalism, which is our current, our prevalent political economic system in the world and in most of the world's nations, really promised us many things which it unfortunately failed to deliver. Karl Marx would argue that there is really nothing to promise and nothing to deliver in the first place. For him, despite the promises of freedom and free trade, at the heart of capitalism is really, number one, the unabated, he calls it valorization, the unabated valorization, which means the constant upgrading, the constant maximization of profits for the capitalists, for the bourgeois, who are the people who own the means of production, landlords, landowners, company owners, property owners, which comes at the cost of the enslavement of the working class, the proletariat. The proletariat are, that's us, we're made to think that we are free. On paper, we are free, but technically we are not, because the societal and economic conditions of capitalism make it so such that if we do choose not to work under the capitalists or under the bourgeois, then we will literally starve. We will literally not be able to have food, shelter, and clothing. So yes, on paper, we are free, but the social and economic conditions of a capitalist society makes it so that the proletariat has no other recourse but to eventually give in and work for the capitalist. And perhaps from experience, we know that when you work for somebody, when you enter into an employer, a proletariat capitalist relationship with somebody, that relation is not equal. It's not an give or take relationship. There is a power dynamic there, and mind you, it's a power struggle. Of course, the boss, aka the employer, aka the capitalist, will always have a greater say and a greater degree of power over the worker or the employee. And the employee can only negotiate so much at the risk of losing their job. Now, mind you, Karl Marx does not admonish the capitalist. He does not call the capitalist or the bourgeois immoral, greedy, because mind you, Karl Marx's work is nothing but moral. It does not delve into the sphere of morality. It is strictly a political and economic work. But he does not blame the capitalist system fault on the capitalists themselves, but rather he says that the system is built as such. It is built in such a way that there is no other recourse for the capitalist or for the bourgeois, but to maximize the profits, because that profit will eventually be feeded into the enterprise, further upgrading it and further making the enterprise competitive vis-a-vis and compared to the other enterprises of the other capitalists. The system, in other words, is rigged as such. And at the core of Marx's assumption is that capitalism fails to recognize that the heart of any society, of human civilization, is not maximizing profits, which of course is the goal of capitalism. It's not the goal. It's the heart of any society is not profit maximization or the maximization of money. Rather, at the heart is us, the people. What is supposedly at the heart of any society, of any human civilization, is the welfare of the individual, the welfare of the people, and his or her capacity to work, which is labor value in Marxist terminology. Labor value. Money, in other words, should be meant to serve us, not the other way around, which is what happens in a capitalist society. Now, mind you, I'm not trying to espouse or abolish, attack any particular political economic system. That is beyond the scope of my knowledge and of course of this video's intent. Hell, I'm just a random guy on YouTube. But I merely want to serve as a pointer, as an observer. I want to point out at things which perhaps have glossed over our eyes, our ears, for so long now, despite the fact that these things are so obvious. I myself have glossed over them in the past years. Severe wealth inequality, which just continues to widen and widen year after year. The undermining of human life and the value of human capital. The continued loss also year after year of the bargaining power of the worker compared to the employer or the enterprise owner. And the failed promises of capitalism. Now, before we end, mind you, we are considered at the stage of late capitalism. We are in late stage capitalism. Briefly, early stage capitalism is during the time of Adam Smith, when trade was just being established, ports were just being opened up, international trade relations were still at their infancy. Now, a global society is considered at late stage capitalism. And late stage capitalism is precisely defined by the commodification of everything, including us. Which is why you'll notice in recent years that if you are lucky and if you are talented enough, you can make money even out of ranting. You can make money even out of your hobbies, i.e. playing video games. You can make money even if you, and heaven forbid, sell your body's photos, the commodification of the body itself. And personally, I'm not sure with you guys, but personally that makes me sad. It's sad how things have gone the way they did. But as I always say in my previous videos, I think any kind of change always inevitably begins with recognition. If you feel like something's wrong and if you want to change something, the first step is to talk about it. And that is exactly what I would like to offer and I would like to challenge us to do. Thank you very much for watching and stay safe. I'll see you again in our next video. Goodbye.